Okay, so if you're following along with the notebook here, you've reached this point where we've started to create our Python that generates our server. You see we are importing some classes up here from this http.server module. And we're defining some constants. This uppercase variable naming, this is typically reserved for constants in the program. So we're defining the port, some server name and port tuple, that is the address. You'll see where that's used shortly. And then we're also defining the directory. So make sure you update this whole chunk here with your student ID. It should be like 1, 2, 3, 4, something like that. Make sure you update that and get this pointed to the folder you saved your index.html file in. You also see down here I've given you a class. I don't expect you all to write this, but you do see we are referencing the simple HTTP request handler class that we imported above. So this is actually subclassing it. It's called subclassing, where I'm making another class that inherits behavior from the parent class. And then I'm actually this is the main point right here. I'm configuring it to point to this server, to point to a specific directory where we've saved our index.html. So now we actually have to make an instance of our class, and that will be our server instance. So you see I have here a variable name called server. I'm going to delete these little ellipses here, and I'm going to say, I'm going to reference that HTTP server class I imported above. So this is another piece of the puzzle here. I'm going to give it the server address variable we defined above, and then I'm going to pass it the request handler class we defined just above. So I'm going to say my request handler. There we go. So this is a line. It's creating a variable named server. We're creating instance of the HTTP server class. We're giving it the address we want, which we've defined above, and then we're giving it a reference to our request handler class, which we've defined just up here. This line looks good. Let's just add a little print statement here just so we can verify it's working. So I'm going to do a formatted print statement. I'm going to say something like server started on port, and I'm going to reference our port variable above, and I'm going to say ... quotes parentheses to finish off the print statement. So let's go ahead and run all these cells up here. I'm going to start, so Shift Enter, run all my Python cells, and I'm going to start here, and you see our server has started on port 8080. So if you don't see that line, I'm not a Jupyter Notebook expert, but try maybe restarting the kernel, and then you're going to have to run these cells again. Boom, it's still happy. Okay, so now our server is doing something. We've created the variable. We have this nice helpful print statement. Now we just need to tell our server to, hey, I like that you are created and you're just happy there chilling out. But you really need to start serving the files, and that is done through a method called serve forever. So I'm going to add a little try catch block here. It's not super important to understand this, but here is where we're going to reference our server variable, and I'm going to say, hey server, you're fine just hanging out, but I want you to actually serve our files forever. So I want you to do your job. I want you to go to this code directory we've defined above, and I want you to start serving those files. So that is the only line we have to add here to start our server going. We're going to add this little exception catch block, which checks for keyboard interrupt. This means that we could do Control-C to stop our server, and we're just going to say if I hit Control-C, which is a common keystroke to stop programs running, then you're just going to keep going, little program. You just keep doing your job. And at that point, we say, hey, the person behind the keyboard, aka me, if they interrupt my server, I'm just going to tell my server to close down nicely. And then we're going to have another little print statement in here just for fun, just for some debugging purposes. And let's make sure our syntax is good. We've got, little dots. So we're saying variable and call this method serve forever on the instance, our server instance. We're watching for keyboard interruptions. That's the Control C again. Maybe I'll throw in a little comment there. Control plus C. And I'm saying if the server's interrupted, close it down. Syntax looks good. Let's try running the cell. Let's now see what exactly is happening. So we think our server should be started on port 8080. It should be serving forever. Let's just try to go to a new tab, and we're just going to say localhost up there in the URL bar. You might not be able to see that very well. Localhost, all one word. And I say colon, and I say 8080 is our port. I'm also going to open up the Chrome Network tab because I want to watch what happens when I hit enter right here. So I'm going to hit enter. Also, Chrome's not showing it, but this really does have an HTTP // on the front, so I'm going to hit enter. Okay, so it says in error response, error code 404, file not found. This is because on my machine, this is good. This is actually our server responding. This is not Chrome generating this content, so this is our server. But I believe that this is happening because on my machine, if I go back here to my code, oh look, it even has a nice little log statement. It's saying code 404 because the file that we requested, which was just the index file / there, it's not found. So I'm going to return, my server's going to return 404, which means it's a status code. It means the file is not found. Let's see, I'm going to just try to, I don't know where exactly to hit Control C, so I'm trying to hit it there. I'm just going to stop oh, look at that. I hit the stop button and it says server stopped. So that must be our keyboard interrupt as well. Perfect. I love this. But I am actually going to go back up here because I'm on a Mac machine. So I don't have this like C drive business. My document, my folder structure looks a little bit differently. So I'm going to type out my folder structure. It's going to be something like users. Ian Fisk is my username on this machine. I keep all my code in this code directory. I actually have a little bit different of a file system structure than I told you all to make in this lab. So just bear with me. I'm going to type this out. Okay, let's try this. I'm going to save that. I don't know if I have to save. I'm going to hit run that cell. I'm going to run this cell again. Just in case it matters, I'm going to run that cell again. The server is still happy. It's going there, going right along. Now I'm going to run this cell again, and look, our log statements disappear, so that's a good sign. I'm going to go back to my tab that has localhost 8080 open. Again, this is our server is running on this machine. So when we hit a server on this machine, we use a special URL, localhost 8080. I'm going to hit enter this time. Oh my goodness, this is the Wordle. This is awesome, fantastic. Let me make this little Chrome debugger a little bit bigger so you can see what's going on. Our game is loaded. Looks like it's ready to go. That looks good. I'm just going to make that smaller. And we can actually look at what happened when I hit enter. So this is the HTML file. We say the request URL was this, matches the URL bar up there. It's a GET request. This is 200 OK, so that 200 status code means amazing, fantastic. You actually got a response back. If we look at the response here, we can see all of our HTML code. And you can see here we have the link, CSS link, and then we have the external JavaScript file. So this, when Chrome gets this HTML, it starts reading it, starts parsing it. It's like, oh, look, there's a CSS file. Let me go request it. And then you see over here, index.css. So we look at that URL, localhost 8080, the same as our HTML page, but it's in this CSS subdirectory, and then it's index.css in that subdirectory. So again, this is exactly the file system that you have on your machine that we created in the part 1 of this lab. Going back to this HTML. So after Chrome pulls down that CSS, and we can look at that response, it's all of our styles that we added to that file. It's exactly the file that we have on our disk. Then it starts going and it sees a script tag and it says, oh my goodness, there's a script. Let me go get that too. So then it makes another request for the main.js file. And we see here the URL is js/main.js, just like our file system, because this is our server is serving these files directly from our file system. And our response is exactly what we have. So we have that Wordle class that does the game logic, and then we have this DOM content loaded listener, which, creates a new instance of our game class and initializes the game. So here you can really see how almost all modern web pages are broken down like this. They have HTML files, and then they link to the HTML links to separate assets, CSS assets, font style or font assets, JavaScript assets, and those are all requested by the browser, which then starts running all these assets on the web page. So we get the HTML, the CSS is applied, which is why it looks nice, and then if I type in the answer, obviously our JavaScript is running because it says good job. So one more thing I wanted to show you was if we go back from our Wordle game, so we took a look at the Chrome Network tab debugger. This just tells us all the network requests that are being made from the page, and we can actually see mirror image logs for these requests from our server. So if we go back to our Jupyter notebook, we look at this logging that the server does, and it's saying, hey, here's localhost at 127.0.0.1. That's the IP address for localhost. And we're saying that machine requested this get, and just this slash means it's just requesting the index.html page. And I responded, me as a server, I responded with 200 OK, which means I found the file and I sent it back to the browser. So that directly corresponds to our localhost index.html request here. Then we see the request for the CSS file and then the JavaScript file. So this is how we kind of see all the pieces coming together. We can see those requests going out from the browser here in the network tab, and then we can see the logs on the server of the server saying, yeah, I did actually find those files, and I gave them back to the browser all with 200 OK. So I know that my server is running on my machine, and I'm also requesting my Wordle app from my browser also running on my machine. But this is actually going over the local network inside the machine. So the browser is really requesting these assets from my running server. And I'm going to ask you in the notebook to take a look at some of these bits and bobs in this network tab. So you're going to look at, well, one, make sure your disable cache toggle right there is checked. That means whenever you refresh, you're going to get the requests are going to hit the server again, and they're not going to be, these files aren't going to be served from the cache that Chrome has. And I'm going to ask you to take a look at the sizing too, and maybe some timing. So you can see it's very, very fast. 10 milliseconds is very fast to request a web page. If we just go over here to some random web page and we look at the network tab, I'm just going to refresh and look at all of these requests that go through. Holy smokes, it's still going. So if I go up to the top, you do see the first one returns HTML. And you can really see that by this content type header, text.html. We can look at the response, and it's all the HTML. And then all this HTML has, look at this, other assets that are requested. There's a bunch, just a ton of links. There's scripts. And we can see all of those CSS files here. And then there's some, tons of JavaScript, some SVGs, some font files here, and there might be some image files. There's more HTML, probably iframes or something. There's just a bunch of junk that's going on right here. So this is kind of a modern website. You'll see tens to hundreds of requests going out when you load a web page. Our file or our app is really simple. So it's just 3 little files, but we have our HTML, JavaScript, and CSS all in separate files, much like you see in a modern web application. So that concludes, for the most part, this portion of the lab. I believe this might be the last video in the lab, but from here on out, I want you all to explore the Chrome Network tab and look at the requests that are being made by the web page. And then I'm going to ask you in the Jupyter Notebook to give me some of these metrics that you see here. So give me the time that it takes your machine to request the assets from your disk, and give me the size of your assets. And then also we're going to be looking into hitting other classmates' machines. So that'll involve getting the host name of their machine and your machine, and then going and talking to your friends and being like, hey, my host name is this, you should request my page. So that will look like, you know, you're going to type in up here in the URL bar, instead of localhost, you're going to say, okay, my special host name, or whatever it is. I think it's going to be your student ID numbers or something based on that. And you leave the port in here. It can be whatever port that they say or that they've configured in their code. So it might be a little different, but probably don't change the port. It's not really necessary. You'll leave that colon and then the port number. You'll hit enter, and then you'll be able to theoretically load your friend's Wordle games on your machine from the server running on their machine over the local network, just like you would any internet web page. So the request is going to go from your browser over the network to the server running on their machine, and then their server is going to return back the assets that are requested, the HTML, JavaScript, and CSS. That's the same exact thing that's happening when you request a website. Your request is going off over the internet to the server, wherever it is in the world, and the server is responding back with the assets that you're requesting. So we're going to play each other's games after the lab is done and you've looked at this network tab enough. Remember, disable that cache. Checkbox here is important, so you see the you don't see any cached documents being served. And yeah, that's about it. Have fun.